Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we talk about trends and how you can use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
And we are Spark Partners. Please visit our website at sparkpartners.com to learn more about how you can grow your business by understanding and using trends. And of course, also follow our podcast, as we are always coming up with lots of new things to consider regarding trends. And I want to kind of open up the conversation today, Adam, to talk about a little bit about my business that I had for about 8 years. I started it from basically from scratch, had a lot of good people around me, and I hit on a trend at the moment that was about outsourcing your test and your design work. So we came in, we grew very, very quickly, and before I knew it, I had about 15 employees, and we were working on pretty major projects. Then things started to turn. The projects weren't really there anymore, and I was starting to see some chinks in the armor. And I brought some advisors into the conversation, and I said, look, listen, I've got all these things going on. In addition to my core business, I'm looking at in other areas, and they immediately said, stop. And they said, why are you doing that? And I don't know. The current business isn't doing very well, so I'm going to look to see what's the next lily pad we're going to jump onto. You know, we're a toad, not a frog, right? We got to make sure we stay on top of the water. And they said, nope, there's your first mistake. Manny, you got to focus on your core. But nope, no buts. Focus on your core. So I did. I politely turned down those 3 or 4 opportunities that were in amazing spaces, now that I think about it, and I focused on my core, and about a year and a half later, I closed down my business. So I want you to transform you, Adam, to the summer of 2017, and you have the audience, you have me in the room. Tell me what you tell me.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that we talk a lot in this podcast about the thing that you ought to do. And we're taking a moment here, I think, to step back, like you're saying, and reflect on why don't people go do these things? In other words, we've had the fellows that come on growing mushrooms. We had the fellow come on who had housing. We've had people be on our program, and we've given them some recommendations. And a lot of times people, you talk to them, and they can see the world's going to change like you did, Manny. And it's sort of like, I want to go do the next thing. And then yet they don't do it. And a lot of people sit there and say, why can't I ever seem to get around to doing the thing that I need to do? And 22 years ago, that was a problem that I was focused on. Why do people not go do things that they look obvious? You know, like, that's the next thing you ought to do. You ought to take on that new technology, grow into that market. Why is it they don't do that? And so we started with a systematic analysis of 1,200 case studies of organizations that didn't make the next step. You know, like Kodak famously not getting into digital cameras and moving forward, with Xerox not getting into printers, right, and moving forward into that marketplace. And those are just 2 big names that everybody's familiar with. We did 1,200. That now, 22 years later, is up to more like 12,000 of these case studies we did. And we were able to actually find ways that you could pocket the things that get in the way. And we called them lock-ins. It's the way you've got a business, and the business is going along. And what happens is you lock in on that. On aspects of your business, and you do that for productivity reasons. You can't get up every day and start the engine new, right? It's a moving. Your company's going forward. You've got a business. It's got a business model. You got customers. You've got products. You've got warranty service, customer service. All these things that you already have. It's not like you can invent a new business every week. And so that's the business model that we lock in on. And the question becomes, well, how do we get out of that to do something new? And we learned that if you could identify where you were locked in, you could focus on unlocking that aspect. So there's we'll go through some of those today. And one of them is that just defining your business along historical lines. So think about this. Microsoft, for the longest time, what did they do? They made software for the personal computer. That was what they did. They had the operating system, and then they had Office. And they made those. And we know that they had a lot of other opportunities. They had Skype that they bought. They had Zoom. They had a lot of products that came out. They could have done other things. But they didn't see that as being in their business. because their historically defined business was the PC and software for a PC. And so it took a new CEO who came in, and he said, you know what, we're in the computing business, right? And we've been helping people be productive. And he saw the giant opportunity in software as a service and cloud computing. And so after 10 years under the previous CEO, where the company really didn't grow its revenues and didn't do well, and then as PC sales dropped, they were doing very poorly. After 10 years of that, the new CEO comes in and says, wait a minute, we're not going to define the company based on its history. We're going to define the company based on where it's going. So it's one of the first things I always ask people. When you look at your business, have you defined it based upon where the customers are going in the future? Or are you defining it according to your historical perspective? And are you just locked into that historical point of view? And that sounds like one of the problems that you had was that your advisors at the time very much saw Manny and Manny's business in the rearview mirror, not through the windshield. They weren't thinking where Manny needed to really go. They were thinking, how does Manny protect? How does he defend and extend what he's already locked in place?
Exactly. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I was actually fighting against that. I was pushing back, but because they came from very successful corporate jobs, one of them had a family business that grew and actually exited. I took their advice, and I closed those doors that could have led me in a different direction. Now, I'm happy in the end that it happened the way it did, because now I'm getting to do this and other amazing things. But at the time, it was very distressful. It was very difficult for me to go through that process. And I've shared some of this on social media. I actually went and did a tour of my old building and reflected on what we created, and then having it basically not shuttered, but no longer there. And I think it goes down to a word I like to use a lot is nostalgia. People like to hold on to these romantic ideas of, Grandpa started this company of making horse buggies, so I'm not going to change. And what would Grandpa say if he heard me talking about changing and going towards this new thing called the automobile or whatever? I mean, people have these things in their mind, and it just holds them back.
Yeah, and what they do is often they'll create a sacred cow in the organization. And the interesting thing about sacred cows is people can never identify their own sacred cows. And I was really enlightened about this when I went to India. And in India, they'd truly have sacred cows,
Literally
right?
sacred cows.
Sacred cows. And so I was in India, and the traffic in India, as you've probably heard, is terrible all the time. And the drivers going along, and this cow wandered onto the road, and so everybody was having to jockey to get around these bad roads, trying to find a way to get around the cow. So I said to the guy, I said, in this country, you've got a lot of people. And why don't you just have people that walk with the cows, and they would have a broom, and they could walk with the cow and keep the cow from wandering onto the road. And he looked at me and he says, what? And I tried to describe this again, you would have, and he goes, I don't understand. And I tried to describe to him again this idea of kind of, having a little bit of control over where the cow wandered. And he said, what you're saying makes no sense. I don't understand it. So just please stop. And that's when it hit me. The cow was sacred. Anything I said tried to change the behavior of the cow. His ears couldn't hear it. His mind couldn't accept it, because the cow was truly sacred, and therefore he couldn't imagine a world in which people would try to walk along beside the cows and keep them safe, keep them from wandering into the road, that kind of thing. And that's what we do in our companies. We get these sacred cows. In Kodak, it was obvious that they could make a digital camera, and it was obvious that there were applications for a digital camera, but the film was king. I mean, the film was the sacred cow. You didn't do anything to damage sales of film. And so you couldn't sell a digital camera because it would threaten the sale of film. So the film was the sacred cow in Kodak. And that's one of the things we have to look at in our companies. What's the sacred cow? What's the thing you never talk about that you wouldn't do? I wouldn't go, this has to be protected at all cost. We have to protect this product. We have to protect this technology. Look for those kinds of things, those sacred cows, and then realize that they're probably not sacred. It's a business. After all, it's not a religion. People will attack your sacred cows. If you don't do it, somebody else will. And if they do, and you don't see it coming, that's a very, very painful situation to be in.
It is. And I think part of the growth of an entrepreneur or business executive or owner is if you truly want to lead your company to success, And you don't want to just be a stoic prick, which is what a lot of times happens. If you really want to lead, you've got to listen to your customers. You've got to listen to people around you that have the best interests of the company in mind. And I have so many stories, Adam. I could spend hours and upon hours, and I know you have the same, of opportunities where there's the sacred cow literally stopped traffic, and ultimately the company died because they were unable to drive around the sacred cow.
Yeah. And, part of this is also driven by a third lock-in, and that's not invented here. Somebody will come along and say, hey, look, we could try this. And we don't look at it, right, because we didn't invent it. So that happened, for example, to the encyclopedias. They didn't develop DVDs. They didn't develop that technology, which could be a way to disseminate information. So they said, that's not our business. We make books. So the technology base of putting an encyclopedia on a DVD or a CD or putting it on the internet, it's not invented here. And so therefore, we're not going to go that way. We're just not going to pay attention to it. That's somebody else's business. That's the common phrase you'll hear. Well, that's not my business. That's somebody else's business. You say, well, wait a minute. It may not be your value delivery system, but it is your business, right? Disseminating information. So don't you think you should look at that? But it's very hard. It's very hard. People do struggle a lot with the not invented here syndrome. And just because of the fact that they highly value the past, they highly value what got them successful, and they really don't like that feeling that something somebody else developed could really damage their business.
That's true. And, this is a great little segue to talk about a mini course on lock-in and some of the things that hold us back from that kind of growth that we all want. And that's something that Adam and I are contemplating here and would like to talk to our base and get an understanding if that's something you're interested in. We'd offer a short mini course, probably less than $50 to get access to some pretty amazing content. And so, of course, we have our course, Think Innovation, but this would be an augment to that course in that, a lot of the things that we do, and I love to sail, even though I live in the desert. I really love the ocean. And I like to use the analogy of a sailboat. Your business is a sailboat. And the operations is the sail, is, trimming the sail, and you've got the galley people, which is maybe HR. You've got all these functions. But what you don't have in a sailboat is you don't have a direction. You don't know where you're going, right? And so our course and what we offer at Spark Partners is really giving you those goalposts, giving you that lighthouse, so you know where you're going in your business. And that's, in my situation, 4 or 5 years ago, that would have been a huge thing for me to understand that I was mentally thinking in the right direction, but I was being told by people that really had my best interest in mind to not go in that direction. And ultimately, I ended up putting my company aside.
We regularly fall into this trap of rewarding the farmers and punishing the explorers. Think about it from a sales. We've done a couple of podcasts about sales and selling. And frequently in our organization, we're really like the salespeople or the people that are close to our big customers. We're all about keeping that big customer happy, farming the business relationships that we have today. And we don't often do very much in the way of exploring. And then somebody comes along, perhaps, and they do some exploring. They come up with a new marketplace we could be in. Do we give them the resources to be successful? Do we incent them to go out and do new things? Or do we punish them and say, well, wait a minute, were you wasting your time on that? Why are you going out and trying to make that happen? Is our sales compensation system geared towards rewarding the farmer and hurting the explorer? What about our product development? What about, to the extent we might do R&D or new product launches? If we constantly try to reward the farmers and we don't do very much to take care of our explorers, you're basically never going to get anything done. And then we'll often follow that up by not paying enough attention to our own people in our own organization. We get a hierarchy. Even in small companies, we get a hierarchy. These two people, there's the CEO, these 2 or 3 people are close to the CEO, have the ear, and then down here's some more people. You might have 4 or 5 layers deep. Now think about this. If you had an idea and it was down here 4 layers deep, everybody feels like their job is to, if your employee comes to you and says, I got 3 ideas, you're not going to take all 3 of them to the boss. Your job is to, I got to get at least 1, if not 2 of those and take it to the boss. Well, if you start down here and you eliminate half the ideas, you go to the next level, you eliminate half of those. Now we're down to half or half of half. That's 25%. We go one more level, we take half of half, we're down to 10%. Go one more level, take half of half, we're down to 6%. So all the ideas we have in 4 levels, we only have 6% of the ideas back, right? Hierarchy of communication, hierarchy of relationships, even just as simple as I mostly listen to these 2 people as opposed to listening to my whole organization or listening to some of the lower level people in the organization, or especially I don't listen to people with their boots on the street. They're out there doing the job every day. I listen to the engineer that's fresh out of school with new ideas, fresh from another company who hasn't done business our way. Am I listening to those people with the fresh ideas, or do they have to come up through this hierarchy to get to the ears of the decision maker? In which case, your decision-making process is pretty seriously flawed just because of that hierarchy, that exchange, and the elimination of information as it moves its way up through the organization.
I have a great story about that, Adam. After going to engineering school, I was a rank and file engineer for about a year and a half, and then I broke the chains, and became a sales guy. And early on in my sales career, I remember going to a customer, and that customer was pissed. They were a big user of our product. We sold electronic test equipment and software, and they loved our product. They were a huge proponent, but they were just pissed. They were angry. And they spent, it was an hour-long meeting, they spent about 55 minutes complaining about, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And I remember I was taking notes, and I was so excited because I was a young sales guy, and I took all that, and I spent this time creating an email, and I sent it off to my manager, and the manager's response was, sorry, dude, we're not marketing, we're sales.
Yeah.
And then we went to a sales, actually a worldwide conference of the whole company, and I saw the marketing manager that was in charge of that product line, and I rushed up there. I was so excited. I said, look, I saw this customer, and this is the feedback they gave me. And they said, well, really appreciate that, Manny, but you're just in sales. We have marketing people that do that. And it just blew my mind that I didn't want to hear the feedback from the customer's mouth. They'd rather play their games with their marketing, sessions or whatever they call those. It was awful.
And that gets tied into what I call political correctness. It's another lock-in. In our company, this is the way we talk about customers. This is the way we communicate with each other. There's a culture. I hate that word culture because people use that as an excuse, right? Our culture is to do things this way. I've even heard people say we hire for our culture, in which case I'm saying, oh, so you mean everybody's got to think alike? Everybody's got to act alike? If everybody thinks alike and act alike, where are you going to get the new idea? But we do put too much political correctness. I'm not talking about, government politics. I'm not talking about Democrats, Republicans. I'm talking about cultural, political correctness in your organization. Do we allow arguing to occur? Do we allow people to jump over the hierarchy with a new idea? Do we allow people to say that it's possible that our product could become obsolete? Do we allow people to talk about competitors that have fringe offerings that are being used, by just a handful of folks, but, they're getting used by someone? Do we allow this kind of activity and these discussions to occur? At DuPont, they prided themselves on the fact that most employees work their entire career at DuPont. And one of the things they really built on was this culture that they had, how we would communicate. I remember one fellow telling me that he said, what General Electric would consider a conversation at DuPont would be considered a schoolhouse brawl. In other words, we do not at DuPont get into that sort of arguing with each other that the people at General Electric do, right? And they felt good about that, right? Well, that political correctness is never good for your business, right? You should have a culture in which people can come to the fore. People can say these things like you did, Manny. They can go and talk to other parts of the company and talk across the hierarchy and bring these ideas up so that it gives you an opportunity to break out of those old lock-ins.
Exactly. Yeah, my own company, Azterra, there was 2 things that are interesting with respect to this conversation. The first of which is in our conference room, and in actually my office and the office of some of the managers, we had a little plaque that talked about a number, we call it the Azterra Creed. It's kind of how we operated, our quote-unquote culture. And one of those things, I think it was the first or the second one, actually it was the second one, that talked about safety. That you were able and you were safe to say whatever you want about our product, about our service, about whatever, because we value that. I wouldn't go as far as conflict, that that sort of tug of war, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that's what actually led us to really good growth. The other term that was interesting here is we banned the word hope.
Really?
We banned it. We literally banned it because for a long time we'd ask folks of, how's it going with this project? And how's it going with this guy? Well, we hope we're on track, or we hope that he gets back to us. And so that was also, we were trying to shape our culture. And yeah. I kind of agree with you. People use culture as a scapegoat. Well, we hire for culture, but culture is very important, and that's how companies run. So we can have a whole discussion about culture down the road for sure.
Well, think about Netflix. Netflix had a culture that was around logistics, right? They moved these DVDs and VHS tapes around. It was a culture built on logistics. They would have never gotten into streaming if they hadn't been willing to change their culture and make it more of a technology-oriented culture where we were streaming videos and it wasn't about logistics. And then as they gained global dominance and they were able to stream anywhere they wanted to, they realized they needed their own content. Well, now they needed to shift from a culture that was about sort of geekiness and techiness and how to move data and bits around really fast and to analyze those data for new products to one in which you had creatives that were going to be much more important, a culture of content creation, right? So the creatives. So that's three different cultures, right? But they didn't let culture stop them. They did, the leadership didn't say, well, our culture is here, therefore we stay here. They said we have to develop the right culture to be able to do what our customers want us to do, to be able to meet those customer needs. And, part of that is getting beyond the short-term profit orientation. Because in the short term, it's always easiest to keep doing what you've always done, not invest in something new. Just invest, I remember one time when I was with Computer Sciences Corporation, the president of the company was talking in the fourth quarter, and he said, if everybody would get out there and your project teams would just build 2 more billable hours per employee per month, let me show you what that'll do in the fourth quarter and what that would do for the year. And later I talked with him and I said, you know what? You just told everybody out there to just do one thing, go out and focus on farming your customer base. When the reality is, if you really want that revenue, we should be launching new products. We need new products in internet. We need new products in wireless. We need to go out there and be helping our customers do new things. But he was letting that short-term profit orientation say, well, the easiest thing to do is try to get a little bit more, squeeze a little bit harder out of the orange I already have, and therefore not invest in that new thing. So when I say short-term profit orientation, people get the wrong impression. They think that's some kind of a big company thing where just in a big company, the CEO is trying to maximize his bonus. And that does happen. I don't want to say it doesn't happen. But actually, short-term profit motivation, it happens in all companies, even really small companies, where you say, this year, this quarter, I can make this small thing happen. I'm in the short term trying to maximize what I can get out of what I have, rather than saying, hey, could I quit the short-term thoughts and think longer-term about how I could get the balloon to be twice as big, as we like to say, rather than 10% improvement, a doubling? Well, that requires a different approach, and that requires thinking long-term, and that requires getting out of that short-term profit mode. So when we think back on this, as we talk about historically defined markets, sacred cows, how hierarchy gets in our way, these are the lock-ins, and it's the kind of thing that we can apply in our company to start saying, if we develop these lock-ins, are we aware of them, and do we occasionally attack them so we get new ideas? Right? Because if you're going to have them, they're going to get created. You're going to end up with sacred cows, right? You're going to end up with these ideas that, we're going to end up rewarding our farmers because they're giving us short-term gains and not doing enough to help out our explorers. That's natural. That's the natural flow of businesses. And we have to be aware of those, identify them, and attack them, or they'll take over. And then we get into the job of, oh my gosh, now we just can't do anything new. We can't do anything new because these obstacles are internal obstacles we can't get out of our own way.
The interesting thing about what you're talking about, Adam, is that the bigger they are, the harder they fall. When it comes to big giant companies like DuPont and GE and Sears and others that are sort of the horror stories. But small companies they have an advantage and a disadvantage in that domain. They have the advantage in that they can make decisions on usually on a dime. They don't have to work for some board of directors or play the stock market or the shareholder game, all that. But they also have the other side is that since they're smaller, they don't always have that cushion in order to weather a storm. They don't have a 90-year history or a 60-year history of this and that. And so for the small business owners, it really, really needs to be more a judicious process. And that can come from taking our course, Think Innovation. There's a whole process laid out of how you look at how you do your planning from the outside in, how you look at what trends are surrounding you, how you bring those together in trend clusters. And there's ways to deploy this when it comes to creating these blank space teams. What direction are you going to go into? What's the next lily pad you're going to jump to? In my business, we had an opportunity to go in about 4 different directions. And what happened is that we decided to stay on our lily pad, and we ended up sinking. And again, I use that as a banner of success because it really helped me to grow. But I want to make sure that our listeners know that you've got to not only think about it, but you have to act. And that act is what we're talking about.
I had an interaction recently with a small businessman. His revenues were a couple $1 million a year, and he sold electronic parts. He'd had the business for 30 years. Now, those of us that have been around for 30 years remember there was a time when if your television, radio, or computer broke, you would replace a part in it. We don't do much of that anymore. Now you use a product that quits working, you discard it, and you buy a brand new product. But he still was in the electronic parts business. And one day he started getting some orders for a certain part. And then he got a big order for this part. And he was like really confused. Why am I getting an order, this really, really large order for this part? And so he called up the customers who placed the order online and said, why are you buying all of my parts? And he said, oh, well, we know that part, and we know the gold and the platinum that is in that part, and we're taking them and we're actually melting it down because the gold and platinum in that part is worth about 5 times what you're selling the part for. So we're doing it to get the base metals out of it so that we can go sell the base metals. And this triggered in his mind. He got on the phone, he did some checking, and he found out that all of the inventory that he had in his warehouse as parts was worth somewhere in the range of 10 to 20% of what it was worth as raw materials. He could call up reclaimers, he could sell all the parts and get somewhere between 5 and 10 times what he would get if he sold it all as electronic parts. And I said, well, what's stopping you from doing that? He goes, well, I don't know what I'd do next. If I sold it all, what would I do? All I know how to do is electronic parts. And see, that's where you need a course like ours, because you sit down and say, look, the world's full of opportunities, and you're letting the fact that you've been in this one business scare you, and you're just locked in to the point that you're not seeing the opportunity. So let's separate that out, go spend some time, think about trends, think about the future, think about what's going on, and then we'll unlock those lock-ins and get you into something that's a lot more fun.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Talk about opportunity in your backyard, and you see that a lot in these folks that have started a business or many years ago or have run a business for a long time. They would rather go down with the ship than jump to another ship of opportunity. And that happened to me, and I understand why in my situation, but I don't understand why in that example. And so this is a good time to talk about our thinking about this mini course, because the more I think about it, Adam, I think we should just do it. I think there's lots of people that could benefit from it.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many people out there. Again, a few years ago, I was doing a workshop, and a woman in the workshop was describing how their family had 20, what I'll call, convenience stores. They were gas stations and convenience store combo, and they were in a certain geography in the Midwest. And her grandfather had founded the business. He'd been a petroleum distributor, and he'd founded the business of these convenience stores. Well, now, what's going to happen to that business as we electrify the auto fleet? Our demand for gas stations has peaked. If anything, it's it is getting smaller. We're going to have fewer and fewer fill-up stations, gas stations, whatever you want to call them, convenience stores going forward. Is she ready for that now? But see, to her, those convenience stores are golden. They're the sacred cow. Grandpa's business. He started the business, and those are a sacred cow. She doesn't want to let go of them. But what you have to realize is you got to see through that sacred cow. Start to realize Grandpa wouldn't want you to hang on to a bunch of real estate and operated at below market levels because you're just trying to keep Grandpa's legacy alive. He got in that business to make money. That's why you're here. And so that's where our course can really help people. We can help them identify that's a sacred cow. Knock that sacred cow down and let's move on. And it's not always easy to do mentally, and it's not always easy to do emotionally, but if you start to identify these lock-ins and you attack them, then it does make the world much more one in which you see the opportunities.
Yes, I agree. And also, that's a good segue, Adam, to just mention that that our listening audience and the world at large has access to Adam and I for very specific consulting and assessment opportunities. It's something that we do on an ad hoc basis, but that is an opportunity. If your business is at a point where you could use some foresight, you can use some direction, we have the ability, especially Adam, with being a voracious shark and just telling it the way it is. I tend to be a little bit more reserved about it. I still get my point across, but Adam is no BS kind of guy. He just lays it in, which is oftentimes hard to hear if you're a business owner. We've actually had people that we've interviewed on this podcast that were unhappy with that process and asked us to not publish the podcast. And, we might publish it one day as a part of our little nostalgia pack. But Adam, this has been a great half hour as always, and enjoy the opportunity. Any final words before we log off?
I just think everybody out there would really enjoy life a lot more if they get into the canoe of opportunity and get out of the locked-in canoe.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Adam. We'll talk to you later. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye-bye.